We want to give you some information here. Very serious information. As we start our Black History Month from now, you know, we don't come out of the blackness still, but there are certain times when we give you more black information than certain times. You understand? Because, you know, we have to put in this and put in that. Sometimes we put in this and sometimes we put in that. But straight up, it's the next month. Next month, you better buy up enough cassette between Andrea Williams and Muta Baroka program. Enough cassette. But TDK should have paid me Andrea the Rasta. I tell you, we should have get some money off of TDK. Yes. Because we make TDK cassette sell more than we usually sell. Okay, we want to talk about Spain, 1492. Spain in 1492. Now, this is information. This is what they never tell you in a history class. Alright? This is what they did not tell you in history class. We want to present what they never tell you in history class. Okay. The Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, who sent Columbus to the Americas, ruled a feudal kingdom called Aragon and Castile. The nobility, about 2% of the population, owned 95% of the land. Almost all the rest of the people were poor peasants. Now, we're talking about Europe here. We're talking about Europe here, you know, because we contend that the stagnation of African development came because of the invasions of the Arabs and the Europeans and the African continent. And people look at Africa right now and say Africa is not technologically advanced, is not capable to run them country, is always in war, and is always in coups and all these things. But we did not understand and we did not realize, a lot of us, that Europe went through worse than what Africa is going through at this moment. Apart from we now living in the situation and the conditions now that we can clearly define it in our lifetime, in our time. But there was a time in Europe, in medieval Europe, when the atrocities, the diseases, and the whole heap of feudalism that took place in Europe, one would never know if they never study European history. So, what am I saying this for? I am saying that Europe underdeveloped Africa. And there is a book named How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. You know, see. So we have said to you that we declare that it is because of the invasion of Europeans and Arabs inside of Africa why Africa development seemed to be so stagnant, seemed to be so colonialistic and neo-colonialistic. Because we know that every set of people, every continent went through an age and a process of stagnation. And the difference between European stagnation and African stagnation is that the Europeans was not prevented from moving forward by invaders. Because when Hannibal and the Moors went into Europe, it was not to colonize Europe or stagnate development of any people. But it is proven and can be proven that the Moors and Hannibal did contribute to the development scientifically, intellectually, and culturally to the progress of Europe. So there was no period in European history where invaders actually stagnated European development. But what we see in Africa is a different case. When Africa was on its way to development, we had the Arabs invasion, and they spent 1,000 years there. Even Egypt, we've declared that Egypt, which is known as Kemet, was stagnated by the invasion of these people. And then we have the Europeans who came into Africa and stagnate the development of Africa. So we're not listening to nobody. We not make nobody sell we no craziness about Africans backward because we not have no sense. Africa is technologically not advanced because of the invaders that invaded our land. while they progress, not because they are more intellectual or more capable of deciphering technological advancement, but because they were not what they call suppressed in their technological advance. So we go on to move on and we say now, we're talking about 1492 here. It is said now that 95% of the land, almost all the rest of the people were poor peasants. The art of the ruling class was the Mesta, M-E-S-T-A, the association of sheep-owning noblemen. Their herds of 3 million crisscrossing northern Spain in search of grazing pastures were the art of the country's economy. See? That means that them was also sheep herders. They sold wool north to the growing merchant and artisan cities of the Dutch Netherlands. Our historian Hans Koenig sums up, quote, "This then is a very brief sketch of economics of Spain at the end of the 15th century. Half-starving peasants and noblemen holding enormous estates, townships, humble obedient to an aggressive monarchy and church. The country was crisscrossed by millions of hungry sheep, like a permanent plague of locusts. Wool was a national export, but the wool trade brought in diminishing returns, and the damage to the land began to cause repeated famines at home." Listen good enough, people. Famines at home. So, it's not only Africa, famine this day now. But famine was in Europe. And we can tell you now why, we can discuss why famine is so prevalent in Europe. People want to tell you it's an act of God, but we know there's no such thing as no act of God. Okay. This sank steadily into debt to the merchants and bankers who controlled trade and who brought their wool. They developed a desperate, constant, and increasing need for external plunder to hold their system together. During the 1400s, the Spanish crown refined a machinery of militarized religious orders who waged permanent warfare in the Moorish areas of southern Spain. We're going to read it again. During the 1400s, the Spanish crown refined a machinery of militarized religious orders who waged permanent warfare in the Moorish areas of southern Spain. Among the feudal classes, the eldest sons inherited estates and sheep. This left a large pool of desperate second sons to become the plundering soldiers of the Spanish crown. Like parasites, these conquistadors lived off a Moorish Spain. Now we must remember that the influence of the Moors in Spain was 700 years in Spain. It is the Moors that gave Spain its architectural designs, its culture, and its refinement. We know that now, based upon our historical evidences. Okay, the feudals justified this warfare with a fanatical Catholicism that called for holy war against foreign heathens and domestic heretics. God, they said, wanted them to kill and rob unbelievers. The church set up the infamous Spanish Inquisition to seek out and kill those who oppose the dominant order. Listening to me? The church set up the infamous Spanish Inquisition. We have mentioned the Inquisition on this program many times. If you don't know what Inquisition is, go into your libraries because they have more European books there than African history books. So you can find a book on the Spanish Inquisition started by this king and queen Isabella to get out the Jews and the Moors out of Spain. And we must mention here that after getting out the Moors and the Jews, this Inquisition did spread all over Europe. Because you have also the French Inquisition. And for those of you who watch movies like me, There's a movie on the TV right now showing named Joan of Arc. Very historical movie, Joan of Arc. Very interesting to watch that movie to see how the church manipulate the political system. It's a serious thing. It's a serious, serious thing. In that movie and in many movies like that, you will see how the church manipulated the political system to do whatsoever the church wanted them to do. So sometimes when we see political people moving and we feel it's them, we have to watch the greater picture, which is the so-called divine picture. When you start to put a divine cloud over people, it is very difficult for them to establish what we call sensibility in their activity. Okay, so we'll go on now. Where are we? We say, the feudal justified their warfare with a fanatical Catholicism that called for holy war against foreign heathens and people who are referred to as pagans or heretics. God, they said, wanted them to kill and rob unbelievers. The church set up the infamous Spanish Inquisition to seek. Listen, you know, when I read this again, you know, oh, this is history that they never tell you. The church set up the infamous Spanish Inquisition to seek out and kill those who oppose the dominant order. Confessions were extracted, often after weeks in torture chambers. Then the confessed heretics were publicly burned at the stake in the marketplace in a ritual called auto da fe. Now, I have seen some of those, what you call torture chambers that was used in medieval Europe. And I tell you, it's not lovely. It's not lovely. When them stretch you and all these things, it's not lovely. I have seen them with my own eyes, and I'm telling you, it is not lovely. These torture chambers were built by the men of God. It's the men of God build these torture chambers to torture people, to say that they are heretics. Heretics are the people them who is saying things that is not in line with the church order. Not in line with the church and say you're heretic. I know what they did now. They make it a public affair to burn heretics in the square, in the marketplaces. So people, they would lead this, the accused in the marketplace, tie them up on a post and burn them. And the people would stand there and read poetry. Because you have people who's reading poems and singing songs and all these things while these things are happening. And the church fathers, the bishops and all these people sitting down and say, yes, it is the will of God that this must be done. In 1482, as the Spanish state expanded through warfare, the Spanish Inquisition came under the direct control of the crown. Thomas the Torquemada, Queen Isabella's personal priest, became its infamous chieftain. Now we must remember his name. Thomas, Queen Isabella's personal priest, became its infamous chieftain. In the decade before Columbus left Spain, thousands of people were burned at the stake. This is when talk about Africa is savage people, you know. These are people who are supposed to be civilized in the name of the Lord, putting people in the middle of them square and burning them and singing poetry and reading songs. Reading poetry and singing songs. Okay. In the year 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella finally conquered the last Muslim city in Spain. Queen Isabella signed the Edict of Expulsion, taking all wealth from Spain's 150,000 Jews and expelling them. And that same month, the conquistadors turned their hungry eyes westward. Isabella gave Columbus his sailing orders for the west. His orders were simple: to discover and acquire. He was to bring back pearls, precious stones, gold, silver, spices, and other things, and merchandise of whatever kind, name or description that may be. Quote, his 3 ships carried no cargo to trade for that wealth. Throughout the centuries that followed, Europeans justified their conquest by claiming their, quote, civilization, unquote, was inherently superior. But the Spanish realm, which set Columbus west in 1492, was one of the most intolerant, brutish, and reactionary societies in history. Its marketplaces, these are some serious things, you know. Its marketplaces that filled with the bitter smoke of people burnt at the stake. Listen to this, you know. This is not what you call, like when you travel on Reddit's Road and you smell jerk chicken, you know. These are the bodies of people being burnt, roasted in the marketplaces in the name of this Catholicism, the Inquisition. Its marketplaces were filled with the bitter smoke of people burnt at the stake, and its harbors were crammed with boats shipping thousands of persecuted Jews into exile. In the Europe of Columbus, rat-transmitted plagues swept through every generation. This is Europe we are talking about during Columbus time. Rat-transmitted plagues swept through every generation. Less than 1 in 20 people in Western Europe could read. You hear that? So the illiteracy rate in Europe, you know, was high. Talking about Africa. We're talking about Africa. We're making a comparison here. We're talking about the underdevelopment of Africa. We're talking about the underdevelopment of Europe. We're talking about the development of Europe. And why is it that Europe could have developed so fast? And why is it that Africa is still stagnant? That's what we're talking about. So it said, half of the newborn never reach the age of 15. We're talking about the mortality rate here now. And bathing was considered a satanic practice. You hear that, Chris? This is Europe, you know. Bathing was considered a satanic practice. As a matter of fact, you know, it is known that when the Muslims, I will say this before on this program, when the Muslims used to bathe twice per day, they were carried and burnt at the stake. So they was practicing satanic worship because they bathe twice. Why would a man want to bathe 2 times a day? What him have to bathe? These people never bathed for months. And it is said that Queen Elizabeth I bathed only twice per year. And when she bathed, it was a scene. I mean, it was drama. Airy. On the 14th day of the year of our Lord, Queen Elizabeth will take a bath. It's a serious thing. This is the Continent and RFM. We'll come back there. And the Inquisition. Now we're talking about Spain and Europe and what was taking place in Europe during 1492 and backwards. And we're talking about the development and underdevelopment of Africa and the development and underdevelopment of Europe. We're just trying to balance the powers here, you know. We're trying to balance the powers here because we hear people talk all the while that how come Europeans so advanced and African them so backward? How come Africa so backward and people there Africa kill one another and all them things there? Well, we must understand that Europe went through worse than what Africa went through right now. But there was no one to prevent the development of Africa. But Africans have been prevented by Arabs, by Europeans, and we're still being prevented, but we are got through. Yes, so we're back to the reading here. In the Europe of Columbus, rat-transmitted plague swept through every generation. Less than 1 in 20 people in Western Europe could read. Half of the newborn never reached the age of 15. Bathing was considered a satanic practice. All the acts of the conquistadors were justified by their fanatical Christianity. Columbus always described himself as the Christ bearer. He swore he was bringing the civilizing power of Christianity to new shores in preparation for the second coming of the Messiah. But any study of the Spanish conquest of the Americas reveals that the real fanaticism of Spain, upper-class conquistadors, was their obsessive worship of gold. Of his last voyage, Columbus wrote, quote, "Gold is most excellent. Whoever possesses it may do what he wishes in the world." Unquote. This fetish for gold was an expression of a rotten feudal order being ripped at the seams by its own contradictions. The collapsing forces of European feudalism were trying to claw for a few decades more of life, and the rising new forces of Northern European capitalism were injecting an unprecedented craving for wealth into human history. Serious thing. And after we do this link up, we're going to come back to more reasoning of what they didn't tell you in history class when them teaching you about history. Them don't tell you these things. This is the cutting edge. We're talking about 1492 and Columbus and them friend them. We're just trying to make a comparison here between things of Africa and things in Europe. And we do these things because we want the people them to know that it's useless to declare Africa as a non-entity because we know different. And we will make the people them know different. You see, Europe underdeveloped Africa in more ways, spiritually and economically, politically and socially, whole heap of ways. You see, because what we understand and what we know is that whenever the Europeans enter any country with them, especially them religion, you find that the culture of the people becomes dormant, becomes null and void. So there's no space for indigenous cultural practices when Christianity, given to us by Europe, is in your country. There's no space for because indigenous practices of different African states is seen as heathenism and paganism. And whenever someone adopts Christianity, there is no space for his indigenous practice. And we see that everywhere Europeans go and implant these ideas and culture in the minds of the people. People will be living like angels, like when Christopher Columbus came to this part of the world. You know, in land in this part of the world, and in talk about the Tainos as people who was gentle and even themselves right that never before have they seen such calmness of spirit amongst people, yet still them kill them off. We are saying that there is no space for your true identity in European Christianity, or Christianity for that matter, because whenever this religion is practiced amongst people in their land, they give up what they knew and what they understand to be their practice, their spiritual practice or religious beliefs. So, compare then those blessings enjoyed by Spaniards of prudence, genius, magnanimity, temperance, humanity, and religion with those of the little men, meaning the native peoples, in whom you will scarcely find even vestige of humanity. This is a guy talking now. And Columbus did say, quote, they would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them and make them do whatever we wanted. Christopher Columbus saying these things. All right, now. This is a man who sees himself as Christ's bearer, you know. Genuinely believe in this concept, you know, this idea. So it's no science, but who also lack letters and preserve no monument of their history. This is the man them talk about the people them in Rasta. This is a Spanish priest named Jean Jeans de Sepulvedas. This is a priest that talk now about the natives, so-called natives. Compare then those blessings enjoyed by Spaniards of prudence, genius, magnanimity, temperance, humanity, and religion with those of the little men, in whom you will scarcely find even vestiges of humanity, who not only possess no science, but who also lack letters and preserve no monuments of their history, except certain vague and obscure reminiscences of some things on certain paintings. Neither do they have written laws, but barbaric institutions and customs. They do not even have private property. Listen to these people, Rasta. This is a priest attacking a Spanish priest attack about the people them when come find, you know. Him say they do not even have private property. These people never believe in private property, you know. The land does not belong to man. It belongs to the earth. Man cannot own land. But now in their culture, people own land, you know. So them say, no, it's barbaric. You know? How can we doubt that these people, so uncivilized, so barbaric, You know why them to the people them barbaric? Because them hardly did have on any clothes. So uncivilized, so barbaric, contaminated with so many impieties and obscenities, have been justly conquered. See it? Them justly conquered the Tainos, where you call Arawak. Well, them call them Tainos too. Quote, again, an next quote here now. In every story ever written about this voyage, the reader not unnaturally is made to root for the three ships. Will they make it or won't they? But knowing what came after this voyage, I now find myself reading the log of those late days at sea with very different eyes. For me, they acquire the drama of a murderer coming ever closer to his unsuspecting victims. On his first voyage, Columbus had described the Taino people as the most gentle people on earth. This was to convince its sovereigns in Spain that conquering them would be easy. On his second voyage, he returned with 17 ships and 1,200 armed men to establish a settlement and conquer the land. He was now officially, quote, governor of the New World. On his voyage, Columbus started to claim that major Indian tribes were brutal cannibals. This is a story that is written in your history books. We want to vanquish that lie that has been perpetuated in history books. One of the things that they tell us in history is that the cannibals, known as the Caribs, ate the Arawak. That is why the Arawak population get less. But it's lie them telling on the Caribs. There's no evidence archaeologically or anthropologically that the Caribs were cannibals. Is the Spaniards kill the Arawaks? It's not eat them get eaten. Lie them telling. So we want to dash away that mythology that has been perpetuated amongst black people about the Arawaks and the Caribs. That's the reason why the Arawak population was lessened in this part of the world was because they were eaten off. Lie. As usual, lie. Is Christopher Columbus and his friend them kill them off. So okay. On this voyage, Columbus started to claim that major Indian tribes were brutal cannibals. This myth continues today. However, the anthropologist W. Arends recently documented that there was never any evidence that the Caribs ate human flesh regularly for food, or any of them, yes, all right. At this time, the European feudals were roasting. This is serious thing, you know. Meanwhile, Columbus was spreading the doctrine of cannibalism amongst the Caribs. In Europe, they were roasting their own in the marketplaces. People, I want you to listen to these things, you know. This is not Muta Baruka story, you know. This is history. That Muta Baruka is story. HIS-STORY. In story this. It's not me write these stories. You understand? These stories is documented. Meanwhile, Christopher Columbus was spreading the doctrine of cannibalism amongst the Caribs. Over in Spain and Europe in general, they were roasting people at the stake in the name of Christianity. Seriously. At this time, the European feudals were roasting scientists, women, and peasant rebels alive in the marketplace of Europe. But their agent Columbus decided to portray the Indians as man-eating beasts to justify killing any of them that opposed the European invasion. The Spaniards established a settlement on the island Columbus called Hispaniola. This is the island where Haiti and the Dominican Republic are today. In the 1490s, it already had an Arawak name Pascaya. And luckily for the native peoples there, this was one island which actually had traces of gold mixed in the sand of a few riverbeds. And we must know that even though they were searching for gold, Columbus did not find any more heap of gold. And we're going to show you how these people claiming that these natives were barbaric show more barbarianism than the people who them come find. We know that. We know that enough. It says, Governor Columbus announced new orders. Listen to the orders they say out now. Each Arawak man and woman over 14 years old would be required to bring a quota of gold to the conquistadors every 3 months. This is the order now, you know. After the man come from the people them land, him no ask them no question, him joke flagging at the land, him come a sentence Bay. What them call Discovery Bay. I don't know why them call it Discovery Bay. I mean, I know why them call it Discovery Bay, but I don't say why it should be called Discovery Bay. Because I'm sure never discover me. Christopher Columbus took a flag, Spain flag in the sand. Now ask the people them no question. And claim that this is in the name of King and Queen of Spain. This land belongs to Spain. Never ask the people them nothing, you know. Never ask the people them a thing. They know him set up a law now. For the people them now, that look here now. Every woman and man over 14 years old is required to bring a quota of gold to the conquistadors every 3 months. Those who did wore a copper token around the neck. So anyone who bringing this quota, you know, was what you call now, paid a copper token around the neck. Those who could not pay the tribute had their hands cut off and their noses slit. I wonder if the people them here would say a while ago. These are the things they never tell you in history class. That when any Arawak that did not live up to this quota that Columbus set, his hands were cut off and their noses slit. Most bled to death. No, I want to tell the people them this. This is something that them never teach in history class. In the Congo, serious thing, in the Congo, in the Belgium, when Leopold and his friend them went to the Congo, and I have pictures of these things. This is not painting now. This is not the painting like Jesus painting. This is actual photographs that is taken by these white people because they never see it as no big thing to do these things. And we're going to show you how barbaric these people is when them claim the Africans barbaric. Just the other day, 1492, these things was happening. 500 years ago, these things was happening in Europe and then spread it in other people's country. No. In the Congo, this guy, King Leopold of Belgium, I have pictures where you see Africans walking around with no wrist. Some of them cannot walk because them footpath get chopped off. As a matter of fact, I have a picture, not painting. There's a difference between a picture and where the people have know these things. Michelangelo is a painting. Leonardo da Vinci is a painting. We're talking about picture that we take with camera. I have a picture of a Congolese who have him own hand in him other hand. Him wrist, them chop off your wrist. Just like what Columbus do here so now with the slave them. With the Taínos them. Chop off them wrists because they never bring gold. This was a practice. This was a practice by Europeans in a lot of African states, especially in the Congo. Yes, especially in the Congo. And Columbus did it here in the so-called Caribbean. Chop off the people them wrists and slit them nose. what barbarism, and them come to tell we, say, we barbaric. There were no wealthy gold fields on the island, so soon the Indians had given up their few gold trinkets and had to flee into the mountains, where they were systematically hunted down and killed. The Spanish priest de las Casas describes how the invaders, quote, grew more conceited every day, unquote, and after a while refused to walk. They, listen to this, listen to these things, This is things that I'm not going to tell you in history class. Black History Month coming up, we starting our Black History Month right now. And after a while, refused to walk. These are the invaders, This is one of them own, It's not black people writing these things, It's white people writing these things about white people. Alright. And white people don't tell lie on white people. You understand? It's only black people tell lie on black people. White people don't not tell lie on white people. Okay. The Spanish priest de las Casas describes how the invaders, quote, grew more conceited every day, unquote, and after a while refused to walk. They, quote again, this is quoting de las Casas, rode the back of Indians if they were in a hurry, unquote, or were carried on hammocks by Indians running in relays. The first Spanish account of a sexual encounter in the New World describes the rape of an Indian woman given by Columbus to one of his officers. Columbus gave an Indian woman, and I don't like call them Indian neither, because all white people go them call the people them Indian. And none of them never come from India. Everywhere white people go, him call the people them Indian. Him go to Australia, him call them Aboriginal Indian. Him go to America, North America, him call them Red Indian. Him come here, him call them Arawak Indian, Caribbean Indian. Him go to Guyana, Meridian Indian. Everybody is Indian. That's why them have all West Indian and play cricket. And none of them is not Indian. Anyway, there was resistance, and the Spanish crushed it. Arawaks were hanged, 13 at a time, quote, in memory of our Redeemer and his 12 apostles. Now listen to this, black people of Jamaica. It's white people write these things. And no one trust in white people words. So I have to read these things. Natives, the Arawaks were hanged 13 at a time. Hear why them hanged 13 at a time? In memory of our Redeemer and his 12 apostles. Unquote. Native chiefs were burned slowly to death on heated iron rods. Their tongues were bound so death agonies would not keep Spaniards away through the night. Their tongues were bound so them couldn't scream out to wake up the other Spaniards them during the night. Mass suicides began. Arawaks killed themselves and their children with cassava poison. De las Casas writes that the invaders, quote, thought nothing of knifing Indians by the 10s and 20s and of cutting slices off them to test the sharpness of their knives. My gosh, what a judgment. Listen to this. De las Casas, the Spaniard De las Casas, writes in his memoirs that nothing thought that the invaders, these Spaniards, thought nothing of knifing these Arawaks by the 10s and 20s and of cutting slices off them to test the sharpness of their blades. That means every time them one with them knife sharp, them just grab a Indian and just slice him to see how sharp him knife is. In Columbus, Hispaniola, shops sold Indian flesh to feed dogs of war, to train them for the hunt. Listen to these stories. It's not Muta Baruka's story, it's his story. In Columbus, Hispaniola, we're talking about Hispaniola now, which is Haiti and the Dominican Republic together. It is saying here, shops in Columbus time sold Indian flesh to feed dogs of war to train them for the hunt. In other words, when them feed the dog the arawak flesh, when them send out a dog out there, the dog know the difference between white flesh and arawak flesh, so them don't make no mistake in who them going to catch and who them going to eat. That is what is happening in South Africa during the apartheid era. The doctor of death, and it came up into the what them call the courts. The doctor of death was inventing germs. This is not me saying this. Germs that could affect black people and leave white people. This is what the man them was doing. They were creating germs that could affect black people and not affect white people. This is what you call germ warfare. This is reality. This is happening right now. And we say a more barbaric way. When I say barbaric way, I mean a more gruesome. Imagine you can go into a shop and buy some flesh of a human being in order to feed your dog. What manner of people is this? In the 2 years Columbus was governor of Hispaniola, half of the native population died. Under these murderous conditions, no one knows precisely how many Indians originally lived on Hispaniola. One estimate says that there were 250,000 Arawaks in 1492, and perhaps 10,000 were still alive 20 years later. My gosh, eh? Today, the Minister of Tourism in the Dominican Republic, Fernando, this is long time, is promoting the island of Hispaniola as the land that Columbus loved. Did you know that there is a statue of Columbus right in front of the Marcus Garvey School in St. Anne? We are telling us that people are mixed up and confused. Did you know that a statue of Columbus resides in St. Anne in front of the Marcus Garvey School? This is something. Okay. The methods of Columbus were soon applied wherever Europeans landed. Howard in Wright's quote, what Columbus did to the Arawaks of the Bahamas, Cortes did to the Aztecs of Mexico. And we know that anywhere them go, it's that them do. Anywhere them go, it's that them do. Them go into Mexico. Mexico was once Texas. Mexico was once the whole of California. Now, the Mexican them cannot go across the border of San Diego into California because they are illegal aliens. We say that time and time again. One of the people them who is listening to the cutting edge right now in Mexico to know that Muta will be performing in Mexico on the 17th of February. Alright, so put in that advertisement. Muta coming your way right here in Mexico City on the 17th of February. Okay. What Columbus did to the Arawaks of the Bahamas, Cortes did to the Aztecs of Mexico, Pizarro did to the Incas of Peru, and the English settlers of Virginia and Massachusetts, to Powhatans, and this is the Indians, the so-called red man. The next century in the Americas is known by the people and progressive scholars as the Great Dine, though it is really taught in bourgeoisie history. Yes. Course in schools, all right. It is impossible to know how many natives died in this period. The Spanish observer Bartolomé de las Casas writes in 1552 that during half a century of Spanish invasion, over 50 million Indians had died throughout the Western Hemisphere. Listen to that, you know. 50 million Indians died throughout the Western Hemisphere. When the Europeans destroyed the two major Indian empires in the Americas, the Incas of the Andes and the Aztecs of Mexico, elaborate systems of waterworks and food distribution collapsed as well. The people starved. Diseases swept into areas where no white man had yet been. During the 1500s, there were as many as 14 epidemics of European diseases between the Rio Grande and Panama, and perhaps as many as 17 in the Andean region. Malaria, introduced by Europeans, swept through the tropical lowlands up and down the Western Hemisphere. native communities lost between 50% and 90% of their people. Altogether, about 2/3 of the native people may have died, most without ever seeing a white man. For a century, Spaniards would often march in to conquer a region only to find ruined villages and skeletons. One modern estimate says that in Mesoamerica alone, from the Rio Grande to Panama, the population fell from 25 million in 1492 to 1.5 million by the year 1650. Serious documentation this. Death by enslavement followed disease and conquest. Indian labor was worked to death in the Spanish quest for gold. Nicaragua alone lost in the first half of the 16th century an estimated 200,000 inhabitants to slave traders who sold their prey in the Caribbean islands. Panama and Peru, a slave force of 40,000 Native Americans worked the plantation of Brazil by 1560. Whole islands were depopulated. The Caribbean tribes of Caribs, Arawak, and Taino virtually disappeared. What a serious slaughtering of humans. What a serious slaughtering. And them say, the people them barbaric. That is really the illusion that them tell you all the while, you know. That we is barbaric and then civilized. But it's going on and killing people. And when them say we are killing ourselves, well, we are killing ourselves. Them are killing me. I mean, we don't start killing nobody yet. It's a serious thing. And yes, I'm saying now, whole islands were depopulated. The Caribbean tribes of Caribs, Arawaks, and Tainos virtually disappeared. And enslaved people were brought in from the mainlands of the Americas and Africa. To justify this, Spanish writers developed a theory. Listen to the theory the people them start develop now. That the Caribbean Indians had proven to be, quote, weaker people, unquote, who could not adapt to the discipline of labor or the morality of Christianity. Imagine that now. Because we never give heed to them slave labor. Them say we was weaker people, and true we never have no Christian morality. Them say we are weaker people. When Columbus' ship, La Nina, returned in 1492, it brought enslaved Taino Indians back to Spain. Columbus' first voyage was also the first transatlantic transit in slaves. From the second Columbus expedition, 500 Indians were sent back to Spain as slaves. Now we always hear about the African slaves, you know. Now we are here about the Indian slaves that were sent to Spain. And we tell you already that it's not every African slave came across the Middle Passage. Some went across the Sahara Desert and never even reached across this part of the Caribbean. And this taking slaves across the Sahara Desert is as gruesome as taking them across the Middle Passage. Because we know of the Sahara Desert and the burning sun. And you can chain up a man to a next man and tie up a man to a next man across those sun, while using your shade of, you know, your mules and your this and that. How much people die? We hear of 100 million dying across the Atlantic. How much of us died across the Sahara Desert? We never do not study upon that, but we need to do study on it. After this, we don't research so. When Columbus' ship La Nina returned in 1492, it brought enslaved Taino Indians back to Spain. Columbus' first voyage was also the first transatlantic traffic in slaves. From the second Columbus expedition, 500 Indians were sent back to Spain as slaves. Columbus wrote, quote, "Let us, in the name of the Holy Trinity, go on sending all the slaves that can be sold," unquote. After this, the genocide of Caribbean Indians was so rapid that by 1518, only 26 years after Columbus landed, a Spanish ship carried the first cargo of Africans direct from the Guinea coast to the Caribbean. The Spanish conquest of the Americas is inseparable from the transport of tens of millions of kidnapped African people into bondage. Serious, serious history. Serious, serious history. We need you to take a stock. Take a stock, black people. Take a stock. This is the Cutting Edge and IRFS. As we say, we're going into Black History Month and we want to just gear you up. Just reminisce and just search. It's very important that we read. We always tell the people them that reading very important in the advancement of knowledge. If black people would read more and observe more, they would find themselves in a better position. They say if you want to hide something from black people, put it in a book. It's true. My grandmother used to put money. My grandmother used to put money in her Bible and put it up because she knows that nobody that going to read that. Even unto this day, there remain struggles of African people that parallel biblical times. For example, the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 was called by a confederacy of European nations to set boundaries dividing Africa across tribal lands and peoples. While smoking cigars and drinking brandy, European diplomats proceeded to carve up the African continent. There were no Africans present or in representation to dispute or contest their whimsical decisions. This is saying here now that at the birthday of a conference, you must know these things. There's a conference that was called in the Berlin Conference. Yes, and this is where they started to divide up Africa. In its present, when you look on the map of Africa today, what you see there is the Europeans' land mark, not the African landmark. Because it's really surprising I have to know that when you look on a place like Senegal, there is a country in Senegal that is not the same country, named Gambia. They call it Senegambia now. In Senegal, the language spoken there is French, but in Gambia, the language spoken there is English. But Gambia is just like a little country inside of Senegal. It's weird. When you go to the Cameroon, we go to the Cameroon where the Germans them ravish the whole place, then the French them come and ravish it, then English them come. In one town, as a matter of fact, in Cameroon alone, there's 200 and odd French. Yaoundé is the capital. When you go outside of Yaoundé now, you have one that is English. So in that country, in that what you call parish then, everybody there talk English. But if you go in the other parish, everybody there talk French. Now your family, you will have family in the English section that don't know the French in the French section. It's a weird phenomenon when you go there. You know, because the Cameroon was part of what you call the collection point of slaves, of Africans, I should say. The collection point. What you have is that Africans that come from different parts of Africa and then come bungle them up right there so now. You have the different languages in wanting to communicate. Different languages start to develop just like this so alone, So 200 and odd different languages in one country. It's a weird phenomenon that, And it's not only weird, but we must understand that the French and the English, which is the most spoken language in Africa right now, who give with the French and who give with the English? Who is the colonizers of these countries? That you can have a country in a country and one part of the country talk French and one part of the country talk English. This is all about the Berlin Conference. Numerous doctrines and philosophies have since been devised and employed to justify and validate this continuing exercise in global white superiority, what is called manifest destiny, the survival of the fittest, the white man's burden, and social Darwinism. The latter doctrine was crafted by Darwin's theory of evolution, placing whites at the top of the evolutionary scale, followed by those of yellow, brown, and black pigments in this scheme of things. Africans came in just above apes and monkeys. The bell curve was merely the latest version of this trend. Never before in history had so many nations gathered in one place, quite so brazenly to deliberate and agree upon the seizure of a whole continent and the treat as chattels with people and their estates. Every European country, with the exception of Switzerland, was there. Both the United States of America and the Ottoman Empire were also represented. Hung on the wall was a large map of Africa. The present-day boundaries of Africa and other regions of the world, as drawn by the European colonial powers, without a regard for pre-existing historical and ethnic differences, have led to untold chaos, misery and suffering on the part of millions. That conference began in November 1884 has come to be seen as the key moment in the history of the colonization of Africa. Soon after began the scramble for Africa, and the partitioning of the continent was completed. This is what we call now the Berlin Conference. Berlin Conference divide Africa. Isn't it ironical? No, I'll make the people don't even check things, you know. How is it that Egypt, listen to these realities now. This is realities now. To show you how these people is confused and then make we just as confused as them. How is it that Egypt is supposed to be in the northern part of Africa? When we look on the map, if you remember the map of Africa right now, Egypt is in the northeastern part of Africa. Alright. Ethiopia is below Egypt. In other words, Ethiopia is south of Egypt. Because you have other countries in between Ethiopia and Egypt. And then below Ethiopia is even Uganda, which is even more southern of Egypt. Now, have you ever heard of a river flowing up? Have you ever heard of a river flowing up? Hear what these idiot people tell me now, that civilization went up the river Nile. Civilization starts from the top of the river Nile and went down the river Nile because if white people decide where is north, where is south, where is east, and where is west. This is not a divine thing that is happening here now. It's based upon a them calculation. They are deciding that the top part is north and the bottom is south. Now, we know that the rivers of the river Nile is running out of the mountains of Uganda through to Ethiopia and going down into Egypt, and then the two rivers meet in there, the White Nile and the Blue Nile. Now, we are declared to the people then that for centuries, white people have us said that civilization went up the Nile by saying no, it moved up the Nile from Ethiopia to Egypt. It's not so it goes. It's not so it goes. The river is flowing down the mountain of Ethiopia and Uganda. That is what it is doing. It is flowing to the Mediterranean Sea. They have you saying that the river is flowing from south to north. The river cannot flow from south to north. The river must flow from the mountains to the sea. Anywhere the sea is there the river flow. It's them deciding your geographical location. It's a serious thing. Those things and these things. Them deciding your geographical location. Okay. We talk about the Berlin Conference. We talk about Christopher Columbus. We're just giving you these things. At Berlin, Africa was regarded by European lawyers as terra nullius, vacant and available to occupied. Imagine that. Imagine that. Then go there and see people and then now tell you say it is vacant and there to occupied. In many countries we have chained the savage. This is a quote now. In many countries we have chained the savage and starved them to death. In many countries, we have taken the savages' land from him and made him our slave. The Belgian Leopold II, I remember we read a letter by Leopold II. If you have been following the continent, we read a letter by Leopold II about the orders that he gave the missionaries when they were leaving to go to occupy Africa. The Belgium Leopold II had a ferocious appetite for territory, even by imperial standards, as he sought control of the last African acreage, still unclaimed by Britain and France. In 1855, the king had issued an imaginative criminal decree making 20 million Africans, by the stroke of a pen, tenants in their own country. By the stroke of a pen, you know. Africans were systematically maimed and murdered, both as warning and punishment for trespassing on the crown's domain. That is what them did when them go to America too, with the Mexicans. That is what they did with the Mexican people. That is what they did with the native so-called Americans. That this day, the Native Americans is now cooped up on reservation in Arizona with land that you can't even plant nothing upon, while them have Manhattan. Have you ever seen two Native Americans walking in Manhattan? Never. I have never seen that. Yet till Manhattan was owned by the American Indians. The biggest real estate scam in the history of the world. $25. Native Americans get scammed for Manhattan, the island. Late 19th century Africa was a continent barely recovering from the savages of the slave trade, only to suffer the deep and perhaps still more destructive encroachment of colonialism. Central Africa was once ruled by Arab slave traders based on the island of Zanzibar. After explorations carried out by Stanley, an agreement among the European powers, it made over to Leopold II, King of Belgium. Atabenga, then shortly after his birth, came under the authority of a European king. Why should this have mattered to him? Living in the old way within the nearly impregnable forest, why should he care who flattered himself with the empty title King of the Congo? In fact, it did not matter. It did matter. Leopold rule reached into where even slave traders dared not go. Soon Atta was confronting massacre and white men. He was leaving Africa en route to the United States. Now, it is very important that we find out about the story Atabenga. Atabenga, serious story that. Atta's world is a fractured mirror of our own technologically, culturally. It is the underpinning of our day, just beyond reach for the most part of living memory. And it is perhaps instructive as the century draws to a close, which it has now closed. And it is perhaps instructive as the century draws to a close to consider that when it opened, men and women were routinely put on display for the benefit of others. Some call this science, others entertainment. All of it, including the archaic, unsolved question of race, came together in the case of the pygmy in the zoo. And you must know that this man, Atabenga, was put on display in a cage. He was put on display. You can't believe that. People was coming there to view this African like a monkey. As a matter of fact, he was placed in a cage with a monkey. I tell them people have mind warped, Rasta. Several thousand persons took the subway. This is the New York City now we are talking about, you know. This is the New York City, them put Atabenga in a cage to be viewed. Several thousand persons took the subway, the elevated, and the surface cars to the New York Zoological Park in the Bronx. And they watched Atabenga, the bushman, who had been put by the management on exhibition there in the monkey cage. The bushman didn't seem to mind it, and the sight plainly pleased the crowd. Few expressed audible objection to the sight of a human being in a cage with monkeys as companion, and there could be no doubt that to the majority, the giant man and monkey exhibition was the most interesting sight in Bronx Park. This was happening in 1906. This is serious thing. This is serious thing, you know. A black man was placed in a cage with a monkey to be viewed in the Bronx. The Arawak flesh in Hispaniola was sold as food for the dogs. They put the flesh of human beings in shops as food for dogs. What manner of people are these? The 300 years between the supposed death of Jesus and the first Council of Nicaea, where the Bible was compiled, there was no Bible at all except the Old Testament. And as Graves points out, alright, we're going to read what Graves points out. Quote, during that period, hundreds of Gospels and epistles were written, and 36 Acts of the Apostles by all kinds of scribblers, or as one Christian writer puts it, ignorant asses. They are brought into circulation as constituting the only scriptures given by inspiration of God. Most of them were afterwards condemned by the church fathers as being the product of the devil. Now, this is a real serious story here. This is a story that is telling you that at one stage of the game, these people put some books and say it is inspiration of God. And the next stage of the game, some man come and say, no, it's foolishness. The Council of Nicaea was conveyed to determine just what would be included and what deleted to compile the scriptures. For by that time, 325 AD, there were more than 300 Gospels and epistles in circulation. Listen to these things, you know. It's not me writing these things, you know, it's his story. There were more than 300 Gospels and epistles in circulation by the year 325 AD. This is after the Council of Nicaea. And no rules for determining what was genuine and what wasn't. See it? No. If there was 300 books if there was 300 documents about circulating, how do we know which one is the right one and which one is the wrong one? They decide that. They decide that. There were more than 300 Gospels and epistles in circulation, and no rules for determining what was genuine and what wasn't, if anywhere at all. Add to that the morals of the bishops chosen to do the selecting. No, these are some bishops choosing what you must read and what you must not read, and then you deciding now that this is the word of God. Because they are deciding this for you. They are deciding that the Apocryphals, listen to me carefully now, for those of you who don't know what the Apocryphals is, the Apocryphals are 14 books that is excluded from the Bible that we presently read, known as the King James Bible version. The Apocryphals include books like Esdras, the Wisdom of Solomon, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, and Judith, Tobias, and all these books, but this is later studies here. Quote, it is now well known that the first authentic collection of Gospels and epistles called the Bible was made by the Council of Nicaea, 325 AD, a body of drunken bishops and lawless bacchanalians. Serious word. Remember that word, you know, bacchanalians. We discussed that word already. Bacchus, the worshipping of God, the Babylonian god. Bacchus represents orgies and homosexuality. We see that perpetuate itself in carnival, where they call it bacchanal. Bacchanal, the word bacchanal is coming from that same Bacchus, which is what you call a European way of celebrating the god of their orgies and their homosexuality and all these things. Okay. The Christian writer, Mr. Tyndale, says that they got drunk, came to blows, and kicked and cuffed each other. It was simply a disgusting and disgraceful row, a scene of rowdyism of at first 1700. and finally about 300 Christian bishops. See, it started out with 1,700 of them, and then it ended up with 300 bishops without a character for either virtue or honesty. One writer says, they were abandoned to every species of immorality and indicted to the most abominable crimes, and such was their extreme ignorance that but few of them could write their names. These are the people that put together these things that them call the King James Version of the Bible, that we now declare is the Word of God. Not knowing the historical happenings, not knowing how it was compiled, not knowing what them take out and decide that you must read because them decide that that is not the Word of God. The Gospels and Epistles thus voted into favor were not arranged together in the form of an authentic Bible until nearly 40 years after. This was done by the Council of Nicaea in the year 363. This is now 40 years after now, you know. They are now arranging now the structure of this thing. This is not me writing these things, you know, it's white people writing these things. After this council, after council was called to vote in or vote out some of the books adopted by the previous councils. Now you must know, you know, that the Council of Nicaea decided certain things. Then them call a next council now and decide, say, look here now, we're going to vote out. This is not no inspiration by no divine being happening here now. These are some drunkard, some homosexuals, some guys who is without moral principles. These are the guys now is sitting down and telling you now, say, okay, by a decree of the Council of Laodicea, we are now deciding what you must read and what we're going to take out based upon what happened in the previous Council of Nicaea. After this council, was called to vote in or vote out some of the books adopted by the previous councils and to settle some important church dogmas. The first council voted that the Acts of the Apostles and Revelation out of the Bible. Hear this now, you know. This is a serious reasoning. That's what, you know, why the people then listen to these reasoning. The first council, which was the Council of Nicaea, voted the Acts of the Apostles and Revelation out of the Bible. That means that the Acts of the Apostles, you know, written by a man named so-called Luke and Revelation, was voted out of the Bible. But the second council, which met in 363 AD, voted them in again. This is like the story about Joan of Arc, where the Pope come and decides that she was a witch and burn her, and 500 years later, the next Pope come and saint her. What a crazy mixed up Europe we're living in. And then them tell me, say, we backward. Voted them in again. Another council, which met in 406 AD, voted them along with several other books out of the Bible in again. What a thing. This is the book that them tell you say is the Word of God, you know. This is the book that them tell you say man never tamper with and is God decide these things. These are some people who are deciding this for you. It say a next council which met in 406 voted them in. So it's back and forth. Now them are decide what must be in the Bible, what must not be in there, what must take out, what must not take out, what suit the thinking of the time and what don't suit the thinking of the time. If you read Matthew to Revelation, you will see the tampering. You will see the tampering. If you read carefully Matthew and to Revelation, you will see that those books were tampered with. And this is historical thing. And those were books and dogmas voted in and voted out of the infallible and inspired Word of God, and altered and corrected time after time and century after century by 24 different councils composed of bigoted bishops and clergymen, so quarrelsome and belligerent that they resorted to fist-cuff fightings in several of the councils, and thus was God's holy word and perfect revelation tossed to and fro like a battledore. This book voted in, and that one voted out, and sometimes a dozen of a time. The missionaries, when they poured out of Europe and swarmed uninvited over other lands, did not come in peace. They came back by armies of mercenaries whose sole purposes was to exploit land for its animals, foodstuffs and minerals, and exploit the people for themselves. The missionary demanded at the threat of death by the mercenaries the obedience of the people they encountered in all lands. And since they and their armies had come armed and prepared for warfare, they were able to subdue the natives by displaying incredible cruelty and superior weaponry developed after almost 2,000 years of constant warfare. They left the people with the choice of submitting or perishing. All was justified by the word of God, and in fact, so ordered by the Catholic Church. Thus, by demonstrating the power of God through the use of brutal devices and uncompromising cruelty, the white missionaries and the rampaging armies were able to force these peaceful people to accept this God, who not only was depicted to look like the whites, but who also possessed the same evil, immoral characteristics. Those who did not submit were imprisoned or enslaved, whether they were exported to the Americas or kept in their homeland. And the Christian or Western way became their reluctant way of life. The highly structured, moral, nature-loving societies they had nurtured over hundreds and thousands of years were suddenly disseminated, much the same as a body attacked and stricken by an unexpected and incurable disease. Surely, the cure for this disease is the truth. These thoughts may be shocking, yet they are not new. All have been written or recorded before, several times over, and may be found in nearly any college or municipal library. But not enough of us are great readers, much less great researchers. This is especially true of African people. Most are content enough to have the news presented to them by someone whose interest may not lie in telling the whole truth or even any part of the truth. Furthermore, many are not even interested in learning the truth, even if it is the key to eventual liberation from oppression. Many incredibly believe that liberation from white oppression will actually come with salvation by the same white oppressor God, Jesus Christ. People prefer, many of them, to believe fantasy or imagine that there exists a supernatural place or person who can do anything whatsoever. But nothing on the earth is supernatural. Every phenomena has a natural explanation. Just because we don't understand something doesn't mean the solution is supernatural. It means that we are ignorant of the truth. So there's no need to fantasize or claim that some act was created by something above, beyond, or superior to nature. White people have created a super righteous being, a hero who could perform that which they themselves could not. And then them give way, and it goes on and on and on and on. This is the cutting edge on IRFM. This is what we call school night, you know. School night. We're talking about things that Europeans have done to develop themselves and underdevelop we. Things that have been done to us both economically, politically, socially, and spiritually, especially spiritually, in the name of what they now call Western civilization. This is the cutting edge on IRFM. Trying to give you a historical reference point to work with, because we know that these things are not told in history classes. So we want to give you a reference point to work with. And we only can give you it from this angle, because you have already gotten it from the other angle. So we are showing you the spiritual and the physical link of how Europe underdeveloped the African creativity and the African mind, and how they were in a position unlike ours, because they were not invaded and oppressed and chained. As a matter of fact, them used to chain themselves. The French and the British was at war for years and taking each other as slaves. The French and the British, up to this day, the French and the British cannot get along. And about how things are what and how they are now. People don't want to hear we talk these things so publicly on the radio because them say we're creating animosity, but it's not animosity. Truth is truth. You understand? We love too much comfort in lies. We must be comfortable in the truth. And what we are talking here now is not make-up business. These are real facts, historical facts. Not we creating it, cutting it. 163 questions for believers in post-mortem punishment. All right now. There's both a logical view and a moral view of the doctrine of future endless punishment. You know, these people preach an endless punishment, bottomless pit and all this thing, which have not space to present here. We will therefore conclude this essay and with a series of brief questions designed. This is a series of brief questions designed in lieu of an elaborate discussion on these points and covering the ground to present a compendious and comprehensive view of the whole subject of post-mortem punishment. Right. Here are some questions that you should ask people who believe in punishment, like where them say no, bottomless pit punishment, punishment that is there's a place under the earth that you're going to burn forever and ever, torture forever ever. Who created the devil, and when, and also, and what is now is age? What is this type of our race? Is he Mongolian, African, or Caucasian? Of what kinds of material was he originally composed, constituted, or created? Assuming that he was made of nothing, the materials of which the whole universe was created according to the Bible, or according to Christian belief, must we not hence conclude that he is still and must ever continue to be nothing, in view of the philosophical axiom that everything must possess the qualities of the materials of which it was originally composed? In other words, if the devil was created from nothing, that means he is still nothing, because nothing is nothing. Right? If, however, his imperial infernal majesty was not created by God, are we not then compelled to set him down as self-created or self-existent? And if so, does it not then follow that we have two omnipotent, omnipresent, and almighty beings? In other words, if God created the devil, are we not compelled to set him down as self-created or self-existent? But in other words, if he did not create the devil, are we now saying that the devil is also omnipotent, omnipresent? I am saying that both the God and devil have the same powers. Omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, and all the omnidem that you can find. And if two, we would ask how many almighty and infinite beings can exist at a time. Or can we admit that existence of more than one in any other sense than that implied Atalian tradition that a devil or God can dwell within a God as a snake within a snake? Or if God was the first omnipresent being and filled all space by what possessed, or by what process was room found for another omnipresent being? And here the correlative query arises also. Is the grand adversary of souls dependent on, or is he independent of God? If dependent on God, are we not logically compelled to consider God responsible for all his wicked, nefarious, and diabolical deeds? But if independent of God, how will we dispose of the philosophical absurdity of two infinite, almighty, and omnipotent beings? In other words, if the actions of the devil is decided by God, therefore we will say God is responsible for wickedness. But if the actions of the devil is independent of God, therefore we would say that there's two almighty omnipotent beings holding at the same time the reins of universal government. Or if his Satanship is not omnipotent, how does he manage to decoy millions of souls to endless ruins when God wills that all should be saved? And it's not self-existent. Does it not follow that God must have created him? And if God does bring into existence the great prime mover of evil, then is not God himself the author of evil, inasmuch as get out a devil? Who then is responsible for the existence of evil, God or the devil? Or how can God hate evil and yet allow the devil to exist when he possesses omnipotent power and hence is able to destroy him? And if the devil is a fallen angel, as Christians teach, who tempted him and caused him to fall? In other words, if God and the devil was in heaven, the Christian says the angels tempted him, therefore there were other beings aside from God up there who God never have no control of, because God is all powerful. That is what them say. And how could he be tempted when as yet there was no wicked one to tempt him? So if God and the devil was if God and the devil was in heaven, living side by side, and there was no evil, who tempted the devil? How did the devil create evil in him when there was only God and devil existing, which is good? Why do the people understand what we are saying so now? There's a story that the God and devil was in heaven. Now we claim that before man was made, everything was good. God is good. But there was a force that was evil, that was not evil, in heaven with God. Now the man is asking, if God is the author of good, omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient, how come the devil become evil? Where did this evil come from? If there was only good, can we say that the devil is independent of God? Then if the devil is independent of God, therefore is not God create everything? And if God did not create everything, it means the devil is also omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent like God. Can we now give the power to the devil just like how we give the power to the God? Or can we say that the God and the devil is one? And if he did not know it, how could he be omniscient or be the all-wise God? And how could this primarily perfect archangel fall in heaven when everything is and must be perfect, infallible perfect? And if, as we are notified in Holy Bible, it came to pass once a time, there was war in heaven, may not much bloody conflict occur again, and consequently all Garrisonians, non-resistants, be compelled to leave or have their feelings and principles outraged by the exhibition of carnage and blood, they being in principle opposed to wars and fightings? What is he saying? If war is in heaven, that means heaven is not the perfect place that we think it is, because war is in heaven. So how come war reach in heaven when we only think that is heaven is here? We have to look on what is metaphysical and what is physical, because they teach us that this is a physical thing that is happening. Or shall we conclude they will prefer not to enter such a blood-stained paradise, but in preference travel to broad road that leads to destruction? And what security have we that the next war in heaven among the spirits of the just made perfect will not result in a victory in favor of old Nick and his rebel host and the old dragon, thus to drag himself onto the emerald throne? Can anything exceed the injustice of allowing the devil to transform himself into an angel of light, seeing that it is impossible to distinguish him from a celestial being while in this character, and hence impossible to know when to resist him, as the Bible enjoins? Assuming that Satan had a beginning, may we ask what was the modus operandi employed to make known his infernal existence, whether it was by the current mode of making known important truths that of divine revelation, by and through the Holy Ghost, or whether he drew up with his fiery steed at the bar of the word. Why is the Holy Bible silent on this important matter? And when, may we be allowed to ask, was the great bottomless pit first discovered or brought to light? And how was it brought to light? Did it turn up in a voyage of discovery for a northwestern passage or polar inlet? And we would like to ask, by what right and title does his infernal majesty, the devil, hold this fiery pit or brimstone dominion? Does he possess it in sex simple or by the right of squatter sovereignty? And do we not discover the strongest proof of the matchless skill and wisdom of the divine architect in constructing a demonical pit without a bottom, seeing that without such a wise arrangement it must long ere this have been full to overflowing? Alright, what is he saying here? If this is a bottomless pit, therefore you must, a bottomless pit means it have another hole, another outlet at the other side. That means that there's a way that you can come out of the bottomless pit. But people feel that it's a real thing happening when they talk about bottomless pit. So I want to give thanks for the moment and we say, yeah, next week is our next program and it's just earth running. So we just say, hope the people them tune in because this is here to stimulate reasoning, stimulate consciousness, stimulate thoughts.